Welcome to Adaptation, the podcast where we explore adaptations of various forms. I'm today's host, Tom, and with me is
Patrick.
Patrick. Yes, we've had Patty G, and Patrick on the
Now it's
show.
formal. I'm going to go
Go formal,
formal.
yes. I was hoping Patrick Michael would make an appearance, but I think he's leading a youth pastor retreat somewhere in Massachusetts and couldn't
Patrick
make
Michael,
it.
yeah, that definitely sounds. He definitely sounds like he would be asking people to do like those faith walk things where you like blind the
Oh,
trust
trust
walks.
well,
Yeah,
where you have to fall off a table
Patrick
and
Michael.
yes.
Well, we did one where we had to like when I was like in high school and they blindfolded you and then you had to like lead the kids around and I led my kid into the side of a barn and so it was just like literally he just was like wham! Just what he was like oh and I was like oh I'm really sorry. You really shouldn't have trusted me with this.
That happened with us. It used to be you'd have to fall off backward from a table. Like you'd lean back and fall
Yeah,
off a table, and at one point somebody did slip through
like in Mean
everyone's
Girls.
hands. Oh, did that happen in Mean Girls? I don't. I saw that
Uh,
movie. I think in theaters, but yeah, that did happen to us once. Poor Andrew Phillips. Uh,
just dropped.
he just dropped. He was. I think it was Andrew Phillips. But anyway, regardless of the people who shouldn't have given us faith, today we'll be discussing the Oscars, wrapping up our season, some thoughts, as well as some previews or
Speaking
ideas.
of people to whom we shouldn't have given faith,
Yes, the
the
Oscars.
Academy, the Academy.
Yes, as we've learned this season, if there's one takeaway from this season, it is these people have no idea what they're doing. I think we could possibly agree on that.
I think they know how to make the films. I just think sometimes they struggle to evaluate the films.
Yeah, well, I guess you could say the Oscars aren't making the films, or the Academy isn't making the films. They are just judging the films, but yeah, it seems like we disagreed with a lot of their judgments throughout the year, and it didn't seem to get better or worse with time.
No, there was some sprinkles of good ones, and there were some early and
Hmm.
late.
Yeah, so there didn't seem to be any consistency there. But I do want to start off, and this is going to be a brief episode, audience. We just wrap up our thoughts on this thing. I want to start with the what we think eventually the purpose of the Oscars are, both stated, and they do have their statement of purpose, as well as kind of what it ends up being in the culture through the different decades that we've seen. What is the point of it?
Marketing.
Marketing.
It is marketing.
This has been our episode of Adapting.
Yeah.
Good night.
I mean, it's kind of true,
It
right?
is
I mean, I know they stated, what is it? Their stated goal is probably to be something like to encourage, excellence in the art of
mhm,
filmmaking, something like that, I assume.
something like that. Yeah, I could look it up.
Yeah. Yeah, whatever. It's something like that. But the point, I mean, reality is nowadays and I assume even back in the day it probably was. It's like the All-Star game. The All-Star game wasn't really made to honor the great stars. It was a marketing thing to get all the great stars together during the Depression so that people would watch baseball. I mean, that's what it was for. And this sort of feels like that to some extent. It has that sort of feeling to it. And I assume that was kind of the purpose of it. It's why they expand the best picture to 10 movies because now you've got 10 movies that are all going to be on everyone's going to be talking about and kind of has to go, quote unquote, has to go see. It's a marketing thing. Makes people go see movies.
Yeah, I think that's true, and it certainly was one of the reasons why it originated. It was a thing that the different studio execs got together to do, and different studios had different films that were nominated. And I think initially it was much more of a competition between studios, which studio produced the
Yeah.
best picture, which is why the producer gets the best picture award, as opposed to maybe someone who's a little more responsible for the aesthetics of it. And so I think that's true, and I think it's a little more honest early on. Nowadays, it really has become both a marketing thing, but what's necessary or germane to the Oscars is that they don't ever say it out loud. They have to there's this sort of pretense that this is really establishing aesthetic excellence, right? That it is selecting the things that are really great.
But is it doing that or is that what they
That's
say
what they
they're
say
doing?
they're doing, or that's what they're
Oh, okay. I thought you were
performing
saying,
anyway.
Yeah, that's what they're performing. I thought you were saying that's what they actually are doing. Like, no, they're not.
They're not
That's a
succeeding.
lie.
Yeah, they're not succeeding. I think they're
But
performing.
I don't think they mean to. I don't think they actually mean to, personally. But
I see the awards sometimes. I haven't seen them in a while because I find them sort of grating, and I've stopped watching the movies too. So it's another thing. But when I used to watch them, the people who would win Oscars, when you see them win Oscars, it really meant something to them. I don't think
I guess that's
they're
that's true.
faking it. Like when Julia Roberts is,
No, I don't think they're really. I guess that's true. I shouldn't say that. I don't think they're faking it, but I think that I don't think anyone is thinking like, thank goodness we have the Oscars. Otherwise, how could we encourage good acting? Like acting would just start to slough away. We'd all lose our appreciation for it and we become lazy. I don't think that's true. I don't think it's meant to sort of foster the sense of it. And if they weren't there, that we wouldn't recognize it or we wouldn't encourage it. I don't think that's why I just feel like I mean, I get it. There is a sense of accomplishment, and it is an accomplishment, I suppose. But I think it's largely if they weren't there, I don't think there would suddenly be a drop off in artistic quality, and their presence, I don't think strongly encourages it. I think it's meant to make people think and make bankable, marketable stars.
yes, I agree. I don't think that if you didn't have the Oscars, the criteria for aesthetic judgment would fall away or drop off, at least regarding film. I think that it does help with creating product differentiation with stars. If you think of movie actors as products, there's the movie actors like Meryl Streep who get nominated for awards, and then there's movie actors who do action movies and things like that, like Chris Evans or The Rock. The Rock would be the differentiation, right? He is not a person who gets Oscar nominations.
Yeah, but sometimes you get people who kind of end up being crossovers, like, Brendan Fraser or someone like that who ends up, he won,
He
didn't he?
did win,
Didn't he win last
yes.
year? Yeah, he did win last year. So, he ends up being sort of a crossover, but that's one of those things that kind of helps people often make their transitions from sort of either comic or character or action or whatever into being a character, into being a real actor's actor. I feel like there's a few people, but some people kind of do it. Someone like Marissa Tomei or somebody like that who kind of wins one and kind of never quite gets back into that mode again. But I think there is certainly it helps to differentiate. I agree. It helps to it's making again. This is what I think it is. I think it's marketing and I think it's value statements. I think it's we value this over this. Um, at least nominally. At least we're going to say that we do. So we value Jack Nicholson over The Rock or something like that. That's the statements that are going to get made. And we value. I'm trying to think. Like Schindler's List actually is a good movie. So
But it's still, it
like
doesn't it upset your.
like the English Patient.
Mhm.
Like I guess it's true. We value Schindler's List over just to knock on Brendan Fraser again, George of the Jungle,
Mhm.
something like that, where it's we value one movie over another. But I guess I'm trying to think if there's like a great what's a great comedy that didn't win. I don't know, something like Ghostbusters or whatever. These are great comedies. They're very funny, but we don't value them the same way as we value Amadeus or whatever probably came out in the same time period. So I think it's attempts at making aesthetic value judgments in terms of creating criteria and sort of breaking things out that way. I think there's something else going on with that,
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's
but that still is marketing. It's still marketing.
it. I mean, it's obviously all marketing. There's just so much money that goes into movies that it's there. But I do think the Oscars, at least it used to, offers a certain scratch to an itch that I think people need. And I think people do maybe where these type of people are driven to find a standard to evaluate good quality art or entertainment. Or not just in film, but in anything. And I think the Oscars
Yeah.
does provide that itch. I think what they're going for, and I don't know this is all the time, but I think what they're going for is this sort of idea of is something esteemable? Is it something that we can esteem as being great? Right? It's this kind of idea of is this like an overwhelming masterpiece that we can sit around and esteem? And something that's funny is I don't want to use the word beautiful, but it's quaint, it's cute, it's digestible. It doesn't seek to overwhelm us, right? It doesn't seek to be grand, usually. And I think that is the maybe the consistency for the most part that the Oscars have had through the decades is that once they've got going as more than just a competition between film studios, that there is this Oscar genre which is the esteemed film. There's exceptions to this. I think The
Yeah.
Sting actually is a really good exception to this. The Sting is just a light bit of fluff.
This thing is a light film. So is Argo. We
Mm.
gave that as an
Yeah.
example. Those aren't prestige films, and yet they still
Mm.
won.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's exceptions to this, but I think what they're trying to do is create this sense of esteem, and I think that they're actually pretty successful at that up to a point. And I think when you see how excited actors are, or anyone, to win an Oscar, like it finally happened. I won an Oscar, and they start blubbering like fools in front of the microphone. It's because now they're participating in this esteem, and they're sort of overwhelmed by it. The winning the award has become the thing they're trying to make the movie into, right? Which is this just grand, giant, sublime thing that's supposed to overwhelm us all. When in fact, as you're pointing out, it's really just a way to kind of sell these movies that, it's a pretty successful way to sell these movies as
Yeah.
well.
I guess it's in my head. Maybe it works more for movies and for some of the stuff. I think it's the I used to think George C. Scott was sort of full of it when his whole thing where he wouldn't accept his
Yes.
Oscar, and for
Patton.
Patton, I think it was, and he wouldn't accept the Oscar. And I used to think like, oh, you're such a pretentious jerk. And now the older I get, I'm like, oh, I think he's right. It's sort of weird to like put these five people up and be like, this one's the best by some standard that we do. Like, it's very odd to me, and I sort of get his refusal to participate in it. It sort of reminds me, it reminds me of, I don't know if this was his criticism of it, but it's as if he's saying we don't need a Cy Young award. We're not sports. We don't need to have that. We don't need a Cy Young. We don't need an MVP. We're totally different. This is not the same thing. And it reminds me of when I was in high school. It used to bother me to no end that my high school was like a football school, which was fine. The sports, we had really good sports. It was great. It was a lot of fun to watch them. But the thing is, what always bugged me was that they used to give the actors, if you were in the musical, you got a varsity letter for theater, and it used to just bug me to no end because I'm like, why? We are not. This is not a sport.
Mm.
And the art, I remember like the art teachers, and the directors, like arguments where, well, sports are really big here. We want everyone to know that we're just as valuable as the sports. It was sort of this like, yeah, but then don't give us a varsity letter. Like this is you're just demeaning us. Now you're making it be like, look, they're like a sport too. I'm like, well, we're not. So I guess I kind of get his criticism a little more because it almost just has this feeling of this isn't a competition. This isn't a thing where we're competing. This isn't a thing where there are winners and losers. It's not a sport. And so why are we doing this? It strikes me as very artificial. Very
Mm.
artificial. So I don't know.
I think the competition aspect is, I mean, it's obviously artificial. It's a theater in which a bunch of people are asked to dress up and give out
Yeah,
things.
but I guess, but obviously any sport is artificial. But it's sort of there's an art. You
It
watch a football
doesn't
game, of course it's
touch the
artificial.
nature of the objects there. The idea of a sport is that you're the best. In the sense
Yeah,
of
you
literally, you
have
have
to
to be. You
compete.
have to have more
You have to
points
compete,
than the other
and you have to
person.
win.
Mhm.
But there's no concept. Without competition, the movies would still be exactly the same. Arguably,
Yeah,
there's no
I mean,
sense
there's
there
a
that
money competition, but it,
is a money competition. But that's the business. That's not the art. No one's giving out awards for who made the most money. That's just the investors, and they're the ones that benefit from it, or whoever has a stake in the film. That's different. Um, this is more that the object itself, the movie, is not just, if there's no other movie made, that movie is still the movie. If there are 100 other movies made, that movie is still the movie. There's no sense, obviously, different people might watch it, etc. But it doesn't need another thing to stand beside it, and it doesn't matter if there's 100 things standing beside it. It's still an object in and of itself. A football game without a competitor is not a football game. You have to have a winner. You have to have a loser. It cannot be a game without it. So that's why I say there's this artificiality. It's something being sutured onto it that is not intrinsic to it. and I don't know if it adds to it.
I don't know if it adds to it. So I agree in part with that. I do think that the notion of an official competition is isn't what we might call natural to the object itself. I do think judgment of these objects is natural, not to the objects, but to the viewers.
Yes, I mean, critics art without critics becomes facile. It doesn't. I don't think it doesn't grow. It doesn't. If you don't have criticisms of art, then they don't grow. They don't, and you could argue they don't exist. If no one is really seeing them, appreciating them, commenting on them, then do they really? Then they do lose something. But that doesn't mean they need ranking.
It doesn't mean they need ranking, and it doesn't mean they need to pick out who is the best. Apparently, actually, the
Yeah,
Oscars changed this. They no longer say, and the winner is, they say the Oscar goes to, because they want to calm down the competition, which is also very silly.
interesting. That's also really
Yeah,
silly. I just assumed they were doing that again because I remember noticing that. I figured they were doing it because they wanted to say the word Oscar.
more often.
And they they
Mm,
wanted to make sure you knew what they won.
mm.
Oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
no, they were worried about it being too competitive, which anyway, I then don't have Oscars, I guess. But
Don't have them.
yeah, yeah.
Don't make people sit there with cameras on them while you tell them that they lost.
but but I think that what was I saying? Oh, that the idea of art without criticism is, I think, true. It doesn't add. Let me put it a different way. There's, I guess, two stages of criticism, right? There's the critic, who is a person in some sort of official capacity, who has some sort of training and whatnot, and can evaluate objects pretty well because they're immersed in that world. And they have, I guess, what you would think of as cultivated tastes to do that. And then, of course, there's everybody else who has a variety of tastes or whatnot. And I think that what is desired with art and with entertainment is a population. If we're going to say this is a sort of dialectic, that they're in dialogue with each other, the movie and the people watching it, what you want is better taste, right? You want to cultivate better taste. You want kind of harmony between the objects and the people. And I feel like the Oscars sees themselves in their, more buttoned up way as offering that goal to
Yeah,
people.
I can see
I
that. I think it's and I guess it's effective in some sense. Maybe you wouldn't get some of these prestige films if the Oscars didn't exist. Would people really care about them if they didn't think they'd win Oscars? Maybe not. I guess I just think it's just kind of drawing lines on chalkboards and saying this one's one, this one's two. I guess it works, but you'd be better off just reading or hearing about them and people evaluating them on their strengths and their weaknesses, and then not necessarily ranking them. But I get it. That's probably more time and energy and effort than most people are willing to put into watching movies, which are just meant to be entertainment.
Yeah. I don't think the Oscars are successful in this, and I think part of it is the competitive aspect, which you're right. I think it is just silly to say like, well, this person is the number one best supporting actress in the year 2023. She was the best at supporting actress amongst
Yeah, she was
all.
she was she was the best at helping the other people do their job. Like there's just something really weird about
Yeah, that
this.
that idea. But a there is, I think, still a function. And this is when I was a kid and watching the Oscars. I used to watch the Oscars all the time.
Oh, I used to watch them all the
Compulsory.
time when I
I
was a kid. I
watched
watched them. Yeah.
everything I could that was nominated.
Oh yeah, so did I
Yeah.
when I was a kid.
And it was just this sort of idea that a there was this idea that I could participate in determining and shaping my own taste. Maybe not the taste of I'm a kid, you're not going to affect the taste of the world, but that there can be a sort of improvement of me as a viewer and observer, and therefore enjoy the entertainment more, enjoy the object qua object, not for any goal or purpose outside of it, because I was sort of listening to the critical pipeline through this institution and seeing what people thought of as excellent. when you get older.
Yeah, I guess but it's like great book collections or something though. I mean that's sort of what a great book collection is meant to do. And then obviously some stuff gets added that probably people isn't that great and other stuff gets left out. But I sort of feel like if you really were trying to cultivate taste, you'd be better off 5 years after the fact, coming out every 5 years and saying, okay, we're going to go back 5 years. So in 2020, we'll go through all the films from 2010 through 2015, and we're going to pick the best films from that period with like a few years of hindsight, knowing what's coming. We're gonna pick a bunch of films, and these are the films you should really watch if you want to cultivate good taste. That's probably a more effective way of doing it because you're really kind of you're giving sort of time to it, you're giving space to it, you're allowing someone to evaluate something after the fact. I feel like that's a more if you really are going for that. Obviously, that's not really what people are going for. That's more of a classroom textbook kind of thing, but I think that would be better if you were trying to cultivate taste.
That would be one tool, I think. I don't necessarily think you have to simply back away from your culture at any point, wait 5 or 10 years, and then look back upon it. I think you can participate in it as it's coming about and be fine with making
Okay.
mistakes, right? I mean, it's perfectly okay to say, "Wow, this was a great movie," and then come back 10 years later and go, "Oh my God, what was I thinking?"
I was thinking that movie was
Yeah.
terrible. Yeah, I mean, I agree.
Yeah,
Okay,
I think you can have that kind of negotiation because there is something about a sort of an immediate response to a work that has a sort of sense of authenticity. Now, if it's filtered through the Oscars, if you're only seeing it because it won an Oscar and all these people who write for the New Yorker or whatnot are praising it, maybe that doesn't have quite the same immediacy. But I think it probably has more so of it's closer to you in an immediate reaction than waiting 10 years because all the same BS is still going to be printed. It's still going to be out there. And if the movie is esteemed, something like American Beauty, which for some reason people still think is good, um,
do people still think it's good?
I
I
think
think I'm still
so.
did.
Or did we learn our lesson with that?
I thought people thought it was. Well, I don't. I think firstly, I think the whole thing with Kevin Spacey, people
Oh,
now don't.
that's
But that's
right. That's
that's
a
a different
different issue.
story. But that's a different issue. I mean, I feel like most people recognize, especially that bag scene. I feel like most people know that that was total, trash, but maybe not.
Well, what would be
Maybe
one?
not.
Million Dollar Baby? Do people still think that's good? It doesn't have a trash bag scene you can make fun of
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea. I've never heard anybody talk about it. I feel like that's had the, maybe there's just like half these movies no one talks
anymore.
about
They gotta fall off the
anymore.
radar.
They fall
Hmm.
off like with some exceptions.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, so you have a point there too, which is like why invest? I mean, you only have so much time to view, you only have so much time to read or listen to things. So if you wait 10 years and kind of see, well, what actually has risen to the surface, maybe it's just more economic to do it that way.
yeah,
If you want to cultivate taste.
I feel like that's what I do. I
Which
feel like
isn't
I don't,
bad.
I don't.
I don't you,
Yeah, I don't have time to watch all of them, and so there's no way I'm going to watch them, and I'll wait a while and see which ones are still kicking around. And it does feel like a lot of movies from the last 10, 15 years. There's not a lot that people are like, you still gotta see the King's Speech. You got you gotta watch it. No one's saying that. No one's going out and kind of talking about that. So I do feel like a lot of movies in recent years. I don't know what are people going to be watching in 50 years from the last 10 years? What's still going to make it in 50 years? Or maybe people won't be watching movies anymore. It does feel like, movies are kind of falling off a little bit. So will they still be watching it? TV feels like having its heyday. I think people in 50 years might still be watching Breaking Bad or something like that. I think those might still kick around, but I don't know if people are still going to be watching half these movies. Argo? No one's going to watch Argo in 50 years. No one's going to care. So
yeah. Yeah, and I wonder why that is. And because those two movies you mentioned are King's Speech and Argo are two of the movies I think that are exceptions to what the Oscar ceremony tries to award. I think they're exceptions to like the eminent, giant, overwhelming thing.
film,
Yeah,
yeah,
the
and I guess that's why I
film.
picked those ones because those are probably just good movies that but are people going to be watching Sound of Water or whatever that one was?
The Shape of Water.
There's Shape of Water. I always say Sound of Water, Shape of Water. There's no way. There's no way people are going to be watching that. There's no way people are going to be watching. I mean, 10 Years a Slave.
Mhm.
It's not that
12
it's a
years.
bad movie. 12 Years a Slave, whatever.
We're
They're
so
terrible
close.
names. I'm just terrible with
That's fine.
names.
I'm not great with them either. But
12 Years a Slave. So 12 years, 12 Years a Slave. Um, I mean, it's not that it's a bad movie, but I don't know if people are going to be that interested in 50 years. So they're going to say like, God, if you gotta see this movie, it's a great movie. It's really a class. I don't think so.
yeah, that is true. I think that movies fall off, but I think the movies that aren't nominated or recognized by the Academy that are great also fall off. I maybe I'm one of the few people who thinks that the adaptation of The Dead is a good movie. Everybody I've talked to who's seen it, with one exception, hates it. I think it's a really great
I
movie.
still haven't seen it. I still haven't seen
Yeah.
that one. I'll watch it at some point.
I
But
remember we did a podcast on it, and I was like, guys, wasn't this wonderful? And everybody was like, we fell asleep. We warned our wives not to watch it with us. I asked them a question about the epiphany at the end,
yeah,
and they're like,
yeah, the
"What
Epiphanies. Yeah,
epiphany? What are you talking about? We missed the epiphany. We all fell asleep." So maybe I'm unique in my fondness for that movie, but I think that's a great movie that no one watches anymore. No one like it, and it's made by John Huston. Like people watch The Maltese
yeah. People still
Falcon.
watch John Huston. Yeah,
I think they watch African Queen. I
Treasure of the Sierra
think they watch Treasure of the
Madre, and
Sierra
this.
Madre. Yeah,
Those
there's a
are
few of
yeah.
them, especially. I mean, I can't like I feel like I've seen Maltese Falcon like 5 times in the
Oh,
last
I've
two
seen Maltese
years.
Falcon many times. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and I don't think I'm unique in that. I think people who like black and white movies watch Houston movies. I don't,
Did John Huston do African Queen?
yeah,
Oh, he did.
I'm
Oh,
pretty
okay.
sure I guess audience
I don't remember. I've only seen it once.
contact us
So I
on
only saw it once
Twitter.
because I was like, I have to go see this movie because this is Bogart's won his
Uh,
Oscar. It was, and I guess that was why I watched it. I don't know if I don't think I would have. I mean, maybe I would have watched it otherwise, but
I went through a John Huston phase where I just kind of went through all of his movies, so that was, I think, why I watched that. Yeah, but I don't think I think that a lot of the good movies in the '80s, they kind of fall off, right? Even if they are good, even if they are quality. I mean, I love Last Orders, which was a movie from 2000, 2001. I don't think anybody knows what that is. I don't think I've ever
no,
mentioned
I've
that
heard of it.
movie
But yeah,
to anyone, and no one seems to know what that movie is. So
yeah, maybe it's. I mean, I guess it's just interesting because books seem to. Maybe it's because books seem to have more staying power. There's just a sense that if a novel, for the most part, obviously some classic novels drop off, movies that were books that were considered great at one point drop off, but it does seem like books have more staying power than movies do. I don't know why that is.
there's
Maybe
more
because is it
time.
because these is it just because the aesthetics change or more drastically for film?
I think so. I think it's also we're only really been around for about 110 years of
Yeah,
film. I mean, if you look at the first, 100 years of novels or something, like if you look at Don Quixote to, I don't know,
Tom Jones.
yeah,
Yeah,
Tom Jones, like how many of those novels have you read between those two? Yeah, between like
true, true.
1600 and 1750 or so. So I think maybe it's just that movies are still, even though they don't seem to maybe be fading a little bit in favor of television, they are still fairly young as a medium. Um,
Yeah, I guess it's just with the genre just seems like it feels, and maybe to your point, but it's something like if you gave The Great Gatsby to someone and they went and read it, I think most people who are interested in books to some extent who had never read it would go, ah, great book. They wouldn't blanch at it because it still feels very readable. Whereas if you take even people who love films and you say, let's go watch Broken Blossoms, and you sit them down to watch that, and a lot of people are just going to go, this is intolerable.
mm,
It doesn't even just have to be a silent movie. You could have them sit and watch a lot of movies, these kind of older movies, and they have this sort of stilted quality, and people there's the style. Even a movie from the '80s feels like a totally different style. Whereas I can read a book from the '80s, I could go read Blood Meridian, and it doesn't feel like it's from a different era. But if I watch some, older movies, they can feel like they're just from a different time period.
yeah, that depends on the book. I mean, if you sat someone down and said, "Here, read Gone with the Wind," how long is that?
Or
1,200
Ben-Hur.
pages.
Let's go
Let's go
or
Ben-Hur.
Ben-Hur.
Yes.
Ben-Hur that is ponderous.
Yeah, that movie feels like it's from a
No, you're
different time
right.
period. Yeah.
You're right. You're right.
It's
You're
the
right.
books that we
And that book
remember
feels like it's a different time
feel
period. Maybe.
timeless.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're right. That could be part of it. Yeah, it's just the timelessness of them. That's why we're still reading them is because of that.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And I think Ben-Hur probably is improved as a movie in a lot of ways because you get
Yes.
spectacle, right? In the book,
Yeah.
the book has some exciting page turner stuff, not too much of it, but
You have 7 pages on the gardens
yes, if you are
and the
if you are
fountains.
really turned on by gardens, this is a page turner, my friends. But the movie does the thing I think that maybe the Oscars used to look at more, which is, and they don't anymore. And to a certain extent, Titanic does this, which is we're going to overwhelm you with spectacle, right? It's sort of, it's, what somebody like Burke or Kant would call the sublime. It's this overwhelming feeling. And part of that is, I think Return of the King does this too, just because there's just so much in it. There's just so much detail and whatnot. And with Titanic, it's the plot is so big and kind of over the top, and the boat and the like they did
But there were
so.
a number of those in the 90s, even Braveheart.
Mhm.
That's a, epic giant film with fires and
Yeah,
horses and just sort of its craziness and that has that feel to it too.
mhm.
Um
Yeah,
but I don't know, have any movies had that in the last 15 years? Even
uh,
since Return of the King, really?
yeah. I'm
Nothing's had that feeling, that epic grandness of them.
yeah. It's moved into superhero movies. It's not what
Yeah,
we think
that's
of
what I was going to
as
say.
quality.
Which is interesting because I was actually just going to say that it's like the Avengers. The Avengers has that quality, but I think a lot of people look at it and go, "Well, it's a comic book movie. Like you can't give that an Oscar.
Yeah,
You can't give that Best Picture."
yeah. It
Uh,
doesn't have this sort of seriousness because it's, I guess, marketed for children in a certain way. It's not something they presume is going to survive, and therefore it's a secondary category, a secondary quality. And I think people who take themselves very seriously as developing their taste don't really have serious things to say about the Avengers. If they will compliment it, it's sort of a condescending compliment. It's, yeah, this one actually
yeah.
good.
Oh,
It
actually,
actually
yeah.
was enjoyable.
Whatever is the dude who plays Iron Man.
Robert Downey Jr.
Thank you. It's a long day. But Robert Downey Jr. But people be like, "Oh, his performance." So actually, Robert Downey Jr. gives a wonderful performance. You're like, "Oh, okay." But um, I guess Oppenheimer kind of
Oppenheimer
had
does
that.
it, yeah.
Oppenheimer did.
Oppenheimer's looking to overwhelm you with their reflections on the music of the universe or whatever. Although
But it
it
is,
kind of
but
does, it kind of works in that
yeah,
regard several
it kind of
times.
works.
Yeah.
In a number of those, the bomb shots are actually quite beautiful. It had some good moments, but that was clearly a movie that was trying to do that. And I don't know if maybe it's like Kingdom of Heaven bombed so badly that they just didn't want to keep putting money into these. Because it just feels like there were so many of them early on. Gladiator, Braveheart, Titanic, even Dances with Wolves. All these movies were like, let's have massive things spanning huge amounts of time and, big grandiose scenes. We just don't really have those lately.
Yeah, I suppose it's a change in taste, which is interesting because I would say that is kind of what I would call a sublime effect. Or that's what they're going for. They're going for the overwhelming, and what you're saying in Dances with Wolves, in Gladiator, they're looking for big, huge, usually something that doesn't take place in the present, and in some way that is seen as aesthetically valuable. Like we're going to go into the past, and that lets you then celebrate.
Isn't Crash is in the present, right?
It is, but I don't think it's one of these movies that's about kind of trying to
I haven't
overwhelm
seen
you.
it. I haven't seen it, but
Oh,
I thought it was trying to do that. Oh, it's
oh,
not.
well, it's
Okay.
trying to
I
do.
always thought it was supposed to be like operatic almost, like multiple stories all
Yeah,
intersecting,
but
and
it's not like the wide shot thing. You're not. It's not visually trying to do that. I think it's trying to do that
I see what you're saying. Yeah, 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 yeah.
with its plot and its stupid ethics. That it's like this touches us all, which is also something I want to I want to get into is the
All
kind of
right.
ethical aspect or the moral aspect that they're trying to value here. But I do think that's something that goes in and out. I think in the 70s they like the Godfather movies are epics. They are kind
Yeah,
of like overwhelming. And it's And it's not just in the story or the fact that this is like the American tragedy, but there's a lot of stuff in the cinematography too that is just damn beautiful. And I know you haven't seen The Godfather Part Two, but there's a scene where you see Vito Corleone as a young man by Robert De Niro, and he is
Not Robert Downey
not
Jr.
Robert Downey Jr., a very young man, I guess, but Robert De Niro, and he's like going through the streets of this little Italy town trying to hunt down this guy, and he comes upon him in a hallway of an apartment building, and he's unscrewed the light bulb so the guy can't see him, and the guy comes up, and De Niro's behind him, and he reaches over and he turns on and he realizes the light bulb's off, the guy who's being assassinated, and he just starts flickering the light so that you just see the assassin in the flickering of the light as the guy's trying to screw in the light bulb, and it's just like gorgeous, gorgeous scene. And so it's that movie, I think, those movies sort of capture that kind of overwhelming thing that's both in plot and aesthetic. I think Crash is trying to do that with morals, but it has no kind of visual sense at all. So I think that goes in and out. I think Ben-Hur does this. I think the Godfathers do it. I think you're seeing a movement up until Oppenheimer where movies were getting smaller. They were looking for kind of small details, stories about individuals. They're not looking for the grand narrative. They see the story of our age being these kind of outsidery people who are, um, I don't want to say little, but they are not shaping the world.
Well, the death of a salesman type tragedy, Arthur Miller's version of tragedy.
Mm.
I think that's what you're.
The low mimetic, right? You would call that?
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. The high
yeah.
mimetic is, and this is again one of my favorite critics, Northrop Frye, who has these kind of categories of you move from the mythical, where you have people like in the Iliad and the Odyssey, where people are literally gods are playing.
Which is what Oppenheimer's kind of playing with. They're making him the modern Prometheus. They're making him a titan, a god
Yeah.
kind of thing. They are playing with that
Mm.
mythological
Yeah, this Oppenheimer
type
is
thing.
interesting because if you look at the difference between high and low, and let's say comparing Hamlet and Death of a Salesman, Hamlet is about it's a tragedy, but it fits it's high because they're princes, they're royalty.
Yeah.
Low in Death of a Salesman because he's a salesman. It's a low thing. Um, Low in terms of status, not in terms of I'm not judging these people. But with
Yeah, no, it's
Oppenheimer,
it's well, it's hard to this is one of those things where like it's really hard to have these kind of discussions in America because we don't have class.
yeah.
Like we don't recognize it, and so no matter what you say, you sound pejorative, but it's sort of like, well, that's not exactly what it means. It's literal class
Yeah.
distinctions. So yes, princes are a high class, therefore,
We call them
you
high
know,
mimetic. But
yeah, so therefore they're hypomanic, but anybody else is
mm,
low, regardless. You could, but
yeah.
because they are not a prince,
Mhm.
so therefore you sort of get that. But it's hard. This is one of those things where it's hard to have this
But
discussion
it's
in a classless society.
yeah, but it's interesting for Oppenheimer because I think in our society, somebody like Oppenheimer is the equivalent of like a high class person because we still have classes in America. They're just not official.
We do. It's just they're not official and they're not considered inherent to the individual.
Yes.
They're considered based on what the individual does, not on who they are. So we do have it. I'm not saying we don't have I guess I shouldn't say a classless society. It's just that it's not as the classes aren't based on who you
Hmm.
are per se. They're based on what you do
Yes. Yeah, I would agree
or
with
what
that.
you have.
Hmm. I would agree with that. With obviously with some exceptions, but
There are
yeah,
exceptions, of
and
course,
and
but
I think Oppenheimer kind of explores that possibly in a really interesting way where the new like high class or whatnot are physicists, are these kind of nerdy scientists.
yeah.
And basically what you have there in your Dickens analogy or comparison is everybody, all these great supporting characters, but by the way, all of them won a Nobel Prize at some point in their
Yeah.
life. And so there is this kind of interesting new way of determining high and low, I suppose, which is also very American, as you're saying, right? It's
Yeah.
a high class based upon what you can do and who you are and that type of thing. Um,
Yeah, I mean the only thing we have that's equivalent, and Eugene O'Neill tries to do this, is he tries to do it based on race. He tries to kind of play with that concept, but I don't think he's successful. but he tries it in order to try to do a sense of sort of class, and that's the closest he can that we come, but it still doesn't work. It doesn't work in the same way. So anyway, I guess we got totally off on a total tangent.
Well, we were talking about the oscillations in terms of movies that sort of overwhelm and movies that seem to look at more particular beauties or what have you. It seems to be going back and forth. I think the Oscars have started to look at things that are a little smaller, that are about individuals, and that's when we got into this idea
Yeah,
of a classless society. Like this is much more of an American track we're on right now. And Oppenheimer seems to, in some ways, be a change to old forms. Possibly. We'll see whatever gets nominated this year, which should be out shortly, right? We're recording in December, so they should have,
they should be. Yeah,
yeah,
I think they come
we'll
out soon. Yeah,
see
about
what
a
they
month.
are.
Yeah, about a month and a half.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another aspect of the Oscars that seems to be emerging more recently, though I think it's always been there, is that there is a certain kind of virtue ethics that they seem to really indulge in the ceremony that I think is becoming more reflective in what they're nominating or looking for. That is, I don't know if it's new. It seems like it's new. I don't remember that particular type of energy earlier on when I was actually paying
I think
attention.
this feels like it goes through waves. I think this is another thing that goes through waves because it feels like if you go to say the the 30s and the 40s, they actually do feel a little preachy to some extent, especially in the 40s. There's a certain sense there of they're picking movies that they think, Mrs. Miniver
Mhm.
is a terrible movie. I mean, it's just a bad movie. There is no way there wasn't a more entertaining movie that year. There's just no way. But that was a movie that they thought was important, that people should watch because it had an important thing to say about the war. I think that's what's going on there. Casablanca is a different story. It actually is good in and of its own right, but it certainly is, I think, in part winning still because it has an important thing to say about the war. I think there's a certain sense of that. Even something like Long Weekend. I think that's winning because they want to say something about a particular problem. There's a certain sense that they're having that they're picking these movies because they want a particular thing to be said. And I think that's true even in the 50s. Like so I think although West Side Story is fine, but I still think it maybe it's winning Best Picture because of what it says. Something like My Fair Lady, I think, is winning because of what it has to say. I think some of these movies are winning for that reason. I think there's a little bit of an ebb and flow. I don't think Godfather is winning because it has a moral point. I don't think The Sting is winning because it has a moral point. I think so. I think there's a little bit of an ebb and flow in terms of what movies tend to get picked. I think in the 90s, for the most part, I don't think they were being picked
No.
based on what they thought you should like. Shakespeare in Love is
Yeah,
not
the
it's
only
not
thing maybe
winning.
Dances with Wolves, but
Dances with Wolves to some extent. I mean, you could maybe say Schindler, but that's just such a good movie. You can't say it's being picked for any particular reason. It's just that's a great movie. So I think a lot of those movies in the 90s are being picked for that reason. In the early 2000s, I think to some extent too. I think, yeah, in the last 10 or 15 years, they seemed to be being picked. There seemed to be some sort of a rejection of that, even in some ways. Like the fact that Brokeback Mountain didn't win seems to still be somewhat a rejection of that, of this sort of like we're not just picking movies because we think it's the most important movie for a person to see, but I think that's different in the last, say, 10 years, that's become a little bit more of we're picking this movie because you people should watch this. They kind of have that feeling to them. It's not that, wow, everybody loved this movie. It was so good. We should pick it. It has more of a feeling of you should watch it. It'll be good for you. It'll be good for you to see this movie. And sometimes it's because of the moral aspect, sometimes it's because it's weird and you should watch unusual stuff. There's this sort of a feeling of that that's not it's stop going to see the Avengers and go see The Shape of Water. Like it's just like, like there is this kind of preachy finger pointing kind of thing going
yeah.
on.
Yeah, I feel like that with Gaspar Noé films. Have you ever seen one of his movies?
I don't know.
He's an
What are some of his movies?
Argentinian filmmaker. The movie of his that I think was the worst that I've seen is Irreversible, which is another backwards
Mm,
movie. So if you like Betrayal and Memento, here's
Yeah.
another one. It's one of the
Or merrily we roll
yeah.
along.
It's one of the it's it's a very, very bad and very frustrating movie. But anyway, a lot of his movies are like that. Are this sort of like this is a weird, funky movie, and you watch it and it's like this is kind of an irritating. This is irritating. That's what it is. It's
Yeah,
irritating. Yes, it's funky, but it's also irritating. Yeah, I think there is a difference about how you deal with this sort of question of certain ethical or moral issues. Because if you look at All Quiet is doing this too, but it's doing it in a very different way.
but it's very
It's
good.
very good, but I think it's
But so is
yeah.
Casablanca, and it's very good. Like a movie can have a
Mhm,
point and explore a complicated
mhm.
issue, but I
It needs
guess
to have aesthetic
usually they are.
quality. Yeah, I think that well, Casablanca's a little different. I think Casablanca's on the nose, but it's just so entertaining that
It's just so
I
good.
think
Like,
I
how do
just
you
forgive
not?
it. I just
Yeah,
forgive that it's making a point because, whatever. Like this is
whatever.
so
It's so
good. Yeah,
good.
like yeah, they want to stand up for the French national anthem. Okay,
Okay,
that's fine.
sure. Why not? This is
And
great.
also, they're
I've
opposing the
actually, I
Nazis. There's not like if you want to be unsubtle about something, Nazis are a pretty good.
but I just the thing is I always go back to the example of it. You're right. If you're going to stand up, if you're going to have it, this is perfectly fine that they're making this point, but it doesn't work for Mrs. Miniver. Mrs. Miniver does essentially the same thing, and it's just such trash. And it's not trash. It's just boring
Yeah.
as all hell. And so it doesn't work there. You don't forgive its sort of preachiness there, and you just kind of go, it's just not good in its own right, so I can't enjoy
Mhm.
this. Whereas Casablanca is so good in its own right that the fact that they're standing up to Nazis just makes it better. And it doesn't feel as if it's just Indiana Jones-esque. It feels real. It really feels like this, they are standing up. You get to really watch and celebrate it. It just has a real strong sense of itself. So yeah, I don't mind that it's doing that. And I guess to your point, yeah, it's not that I would mind it and mind it anyways and right quite the right word. But it's Mrs. Miniver's preachiness does get kind of a bit annoying, but this one's Casablanca doesn't. So and yeah, All Quiet doesn't feel that way. Like
Well, it's not
it's what it's
preachy.
trying to yeah, it's not preachy, it's displaying a
Mhm.
problem. And I don't mind a movie that displays a problem and makes me think about it. That's a good
Mhm.
movie.
Yeah, yeah. Therefore, it's kind of cultivating the person who's watching it, which normally I find annoying. When people try, I think maybe that's it. When you don't see or feel like the person is making a point that you need to accept, right or wrong, it's fine. Well, as long as the movie has entertaining values and as long as it's presenting a problem and making you think critically about the problem without kind of offering you the solution to the thing or without chastising you. I think Crash does that. It's you know, not the David Cronenberg Crash, which is a whole different problem, but the Oscar-winning Crash. I think if the movie doesn't chastise you, but it does cultivate a sort of, I guess what you might call an ethical curiosity.
Awareness, yeah, ethical queer, yeah, awareness.
Yeah, that works well. When you get to something like Crash, which we didn't do because it's not adapted from anything, and also we wouldn't anyway because oh my God, you get a movie where
I mean, we did pick some pretty bad movies,
not
but
that bad, dude. Like that's
I mean, I really gotta see this
yeah.
movie.
That basically the theme of that movie is anybody can be racist.
Yeah, the
Anybody.
puppets told me that. The puppets told me that already, so I heard them sing that
Yeah,
song.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, Avenue. It's Avenue Q in minor key. That's what Crash is. Um, and it's just like yeah, no, racism isn't good, and it's people can be that, and we don't like So it just has this kind of feeling that it really cannot cultivate its audience in any way. Because what kind of authentic response would you have to somebody telling you, as an adult person who pays taxes and a mortgage and has children, how could you respond to somebody telling you, racism is bad, Pat? It's bad. That's not something you should be doing because you've already adopted those ethics. And not only have you adopted those
Or
ethics,
if you haven't, this movie
It's
is
not
not going
gonna
to
get,
convince
yeah.
you.
And it doesn't offer you any kind of insight into them anyway. I mean, there's no, you'd watch that movie, there's no reason why you shouldn't be racist other than that person who's receiving racism seems sad. I would not like to make a woman that sad or something like that. So I think that's what it is. I think that the sort of maybe current movement, and as you're saying, we go in and out of it, and I think maybe we're going out of it now, that the movies should do some good in the world is, first of all, it's a backwards priority. The movie should entertain, first of all, before it does good in the world. And secondly, I don't know that that ambition can be met. I think the thing you can do at best is offer a sort of harmony between your aesthetic quality and the type of questions you raise. And I think honestly, if you make
I mean, you don't have to, it's not as if you need to be like completely neutral
mm,
though. You can affect the audience's view on an issue. You know what I mean?
oh
Like I don't know
yeah,
if it's
but there has to
true.
be a harmony between that and the aesthetic quality of the thing.
Yeah, and I guess it's like it can't be grafted onto the thing in that you've got a really good movie that just tacks on this sort of meaningless point that the film is trying to make. And but it doesn't have to be even keeled straight across the bat. It can present a problem and still guide you towards the answer that it wants you to have. I mean, that's essentially what All Quiet is doing. All Quiet is certainly not. It's you could never watch All Quiet and think, well, maybe war is good. Like you couldn't come away with that
But I would
idea.
also say, what is the solution to All Quiet?
It doesn't, you're right, it
There's
has no
no.
solution to the
I mean,
problem.
with Crash, it's you know, I know you didn't see Crash, but with Crash, it's just something like don't be racist. I mean, the solution to Crash is pretty easy. It's just don't treat people like the color of their skin. With All Quiet, what's compelling about that is the problem is so deep and multifaceted that there isn't a solution here. It's even hard to articulate the problem other than war, but war just didn't come out of nowhere. It comes through these social institutions. And I think that's maybe the big difference as well.
But the king says, I want that mountain over there, and he has a mountain, and I want the mountain.
Yeah. What is that from?
It's from All Quiet.
Oh, right. Okay.
So when they're sitting
Hmm.
there and they're like, a war's come about when the king says,
Yeah.
I want
Hmm.
yeah.
Okay. I forgot about that. Yeah. Yeah, and maybe Oppenheimer. As much as I didn't like that movie, I think you liked it more than I did. Um,
I didn't dislike
yeah,
it.
but maybe Oppenheimer's a kind of change for the better with these awards. That there is something about the really big, overwhelming prestige picture in which we are going to marvel at the ambition of this person and not at their not we're going to marvel at their ambition and not their ethics, right? I think
Right,
that
not their
mhm,
perceptiveness.
yes.
Or not how it makes me feel perceptive because I agree with it. That's what I think a lot of these movies, that's what I think, they make someone feel good because you get to watch it and go, well, I agree with them. They're making a point that seems good, and I agree with that point. Therefore, I'm a good person. Like I think some of these movies kind of have that feeling to them. Or, it's the same thing like, huh, that was a really weird movie, but I sat through it, so therefore I'm a good
Hmm,
person because I appreciate a weird
hmm,
movie that I didn't really like.
yeah.
But I can see, like they have this feeling. It's the same. It's ultimately my argument with that play Red.
Hmm,
It's they're talking about complicated things, but I understand them. I must be smart. So there's like they have this sort of patronizing quality to these movies, which is just they're just they're pandering.
hmm,
Um, and so that's not a good reason to like a
hmm.
movie.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. And what would you say to close off our season about our last 11 weeks, was it? Journey through the Oscars? What did you
Don't
think about
don't
the
take the don't assume the best picture is gonna be good.
hmm
There was some clunkers. I don't know because I just assumed there would be that I would watch some of these movies, some of these Best Picture winners from especially back in the day, and think, I understand why this won. I can see the quality that it has. And just some of them, I'm like, man, I don't know why that one. Like, I guess I can guess, I can sort of imagine what the logic was, but there just are some serious clunkers. So just don't take the Oscars at face value because, man, some of them are just
Yeah.
terrible.
I was really hoping from this season that at least I would understand what was going on in the world that justified this movie, or that this movie would explain
Yeah.
that time period to me. And I got that with All Quiet. I got that with Forrest Gump, as bad as Forrest Gump is. Like, it's a bunch of people who are
I mean, I
thinking.
got it with Mrs.
I got it
Miniver.
with
I
Mrs.
got it with
Mimmer.
Mrs.
Yeah.
Miniver.
And even Casablanca. You got it with Casablanca as well. But
Yeah.
with a lot of them, like I'm not quite sure what Ben-Hur says about the 50s.
I don't know if it says anything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
My Fair Lady, what does that say about the 60s? Probably very little.
I mean, I think I tried to make the argument that they're using the musical as like a means to discuss cultural issues, but I'm not certain that's right.
Oh, well, I
Just, I
think they
think.
are. I mean, it's certainly
I mean,
Side.
they're
West
obviously using the
Side
musical
is,
to
yeah.
discuss cultural issues, but and so is My Fair Lady.
Mm.
I think My Fair Lady is
Hmm.
too. But I don't think that really tells you much about why those particular movies won in any given year over other movies that were nominated in those
Hmm.
years.
Yeah. Um,
I have no idea why The Sting won, other than I kind of tried to argue that it was something to do with counterculturalism and a celebration of the criminal,
yeah.
but
Post
because you
Nixon.
got post Nixon celebration of the criminal, but in the idea, but I don't think that's right. And it was just a title to the
Yeah.
episode. I don't think it's actually correct.
Yeah. I have no
Um,
idea what was going on with Out of Africa.
that one
That's
baffles
baffling.
me.
Because I mentioned that to my mother, and she goes, "That was so big. Everybody was talking about that. They were printing about it everywhere. That was the talk of the year." Like,
I think it's the worst one we watched,
yeah,
right?
maybe. Well,
Maybe
maybe
Forrest Gump was
Forrest Gump.
worse.
Forrest Gump's neck and neck. Out of Africa is certainly more boring. At least you could say Forrest Gump
Yeah, and I guess that's the thing is
moves.
Forrest Gump's kind of, and it's got some, I kind of laugh at some moments, and it is kind of funny to, you know, look at the Vietnam is very pretty. Like I actually kind of I like the rain falling up joke. Like there's some jokes. Yeah, I laughed. I would say so. I think Out of Africa is the worst thing we watched.
Yeah, yeah. Out of Africa was painful, but I couldn't tell you what that tells me about the mid 1980s.
No, I don't think it says. I don't know.
Other than
No.
maybe questions of apartheid are still live at that time. But that seems grafted onto that movie.
Yeah, I think you really got to stretch to
Yeah,
get that out of there.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I was hoping that and maybe if you watched them all, you'd have more of a sense, but that was kind of what I was hoping to get out of the
Let's
season.
like
I
cycle the
don't,
cup
I don't
bump.
think it worked.
Yeah.
Instead, I just subjected us to reading Ben-Hur and watching Out of Africa. I'm like, oh man,
uh,
that was a bad choices.
at least the thing is though, at least with reading Ben-Hur, I would say reading the books gave me more insight than seeing the movies. I think like reading Ben-Hur, I got a sense of late 19th century novel. Like
Yeah, I
the
would agree. Yeah.
conventions of the late 19th century novel, what people were looking for with that. I understood why American Prometheus won the Pulitzer. That is a Pulitzer
It is a
winning
whew,
book. That's the type of book that
that is a
wins.
shocking bit of scholarship and achievement.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Mhm.
That is quite a book.
Yeah. What else? Like I can
Forrest Gump was fun.
Forrest
I
Gump
I
was
kind of
fun.
got why they
Mhm.
wanted. Yeah, I got why they wanted to make that into a movie. I think the book is. It's unfortunate. I wonder if the book would do. I wonder if the book would become a classic if it weren't for the movie.
Probably not.
Like would pe probably not, but
It's
I
still worth
think
a
that
read.
maybe the book will stick around longer because of the
Hmm.
movie. I mean, I don't know. I don't think we would be reading Forrest Gump the book if it weren't for the movie, and the book is way better than the
Yeah.
movie. So maybe it's a good
All
thing.
Quiet on the Western Front, not my favorite book, but it is very much of its time. It's very much a modernist
Yeah.
work, and it has a lot of those modernist conventions, certainly. So that spoke to me more than the films. I think maybe what it
Yeah, I
is
think you're right because even reading the bus one. I don't remember what it was called.
Night
The one that
Bus.
was the night bus. Night Bus was a really interesting read. Apparently Cosmo had a lot more respect for its readers back in the day because they made them read a novel that was going to be like 10 pages.
Audience, Pat did not start the reading till late at night because he thought it was 10 pages.
It was like 10 pages, and it was like, oh my God, it was like being in college again. It was like 90 pages, it was like 90, 100 pages. It was absurdly long, but I had a lot of respect for its readers. But you could kind of get an idea of what was important to Cosmo readers. Like it has a feeling you could kind of get what was important, especially with the advertisements,
Mhm.
because we got the Cosmo ads
That's
inside
true,
there.
yeah.
But those I do feel like the readings were far more uh illuminating of what was going on in the times than the films.
I think
I agree.
maybe with the readings, what I was attending to more was the formal quality and not the plot elements themselves. That I think I was paying attention to more. And with the films, I was paying attention to it a lot less. And I don't know why that is. Because with Ben-Hur, what's compelling about compelling, but what's marked about Ben-Hur as a book of its time is its length. This is the
Yeah.
type of book, this is the type of period in the 19th century when you would write a book where you would be paid by the word and you would publish it in, six different volumes in magazines and they later would be collected together and you would sell it again as a book and you just make a ton of money off of it. Um,
Yeah, but I go and read Brothers Karamazov. I don't mind that book is absurdly long.
no,
That book just
that isn't a
moves. That book just
criticism of
moves.
Ben-Hur.
Oh, okay.
I'm just
I'm
saying
like, but that book just
yeah,
moves, whereas Ben-Hur is like, oh my
but you
criminy.
wouldn't see a Ben-Hur in like the 1920s because that's a modernist time and that's
Except for like Gone with the Wind. Like Gone with
yeah,
the Wind.
so okay, that's fair. I mean, maybe some, but you'd also see, you'd see like maybe more cutting edge stuff. Or I shouldn't say cutting edge stuff, but you'd see more.
Yeah, you're right. Cutting edge. Yeah,
Yeah, you'd
you
see
would
cutting
see
edge, but
the yeah.
generally shorter novels. You start to see them
Yes, I
collapse,
would agree.
and I think you notice that with All Quiet, which is a very short novel. And
Yep.
so that to me is maybe what you can notice with this season is a change in the formal aspects, just how long a movie is, um, what kind of shots they're using, what kind of effects they're using. That's something that changes over the years. And maybe the story of the Oscars is probably much more marked by, let's say, the Special Effect Award and the Best Picture Award. That might be a better way to track the development of film over the years by what people thought was the best technology, because that is probably more of that's probably closer in analogy to the formal aspects of a book to a movie. I think that's the biggest change you'll probably see over the years. And yeah, that I guess that would be an interesting project, going from best visual effects through the decades. Uh,
I'm not doing an Oscar one for a long time. I'm really bitter with the Oscars, making me watch some of
Audience,
these.
that's your podcast. Please do that and send us a
Please,
link.
somebody else do that.
Uh, actually, then maybe KJ, do you want to do that podcast? I feel like you've seen the movies already, KJ. But anyway, so putting that aside and looking to next season, season four, we are going to be enjoying some Shakespeare.
I'm really excited, if only because I know that the lead, the worst Shakespeare is better than the wor than like Ben-Hur. A, because they're shorter, but just that like you're getting something good in the reading part of it, and probably the films. I feel like Shakespeare is. I know you can mock up Shakespeare, but it's not quite the same mucking up of Shakespeare as you get with
Because you're
Out of
still going to
Africa.
get the Shakespeare. I mean,
Yeah.
you're still going to get
Whereas
all
Out of Africa
Shakespeare.
wasn't really the
Yeah,
book. I
no.
mean, that was nothing to do with the
Yeah.
book. But if you do a Shakespeare adaptation, for the most part, it gotta be Shakespeare somewhere in there. Whereas they just Isaac Dennison, even though she's the main character, I d- she wasn't really very present. Her work wasn't.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
Shakespeare's gonna be great. I'm looking forward to Shakespeare.
Shakespeare will be great.
Let's just chat about it. We'll chat a little bit about the history of Shakespeare.
I think we see the first quarto in 98. I want to
So
say
I guess
is
yeah, that would be no
is
later than 97. Yeah.
mhm. is quarto. Um, and then, well, the folio was obviously 1622,
What do
right?
they call them? Clean photo? Was it clean photos and like dirty? What do they call them when they were just like people just clearly memorizing the play and
Oh,
writing
there's
it down?
bad quarto and good
Yeah,
quarto.
bad quartos. Yeah,
And that like Hamlet has a distinctly bad quarto. It's just it's not very good. But there's other things like Lear has the quarto is actually better than the folio. There's more scenes in it and things like that. So it's a real kind of mess of different things. But there's like the good pages and the bad pages. So there's kind of like the rough draft and the copied out drafts of
I
things,
just
which
like the
you
ones
don't
when it's
have.
like the bad quartos where it was clearly just like people going in and being like, "You memorize Hamlet, you memorize Ophelia, and like and what's his name, the king, you memorize like these other four, and we'll all get together and write it down as fast as we can, like, and then we'll try to print it." Like,
Yeah, let me bring up
kind
Bad
of works.
Hamlet to be or not to be. Um, let's see. Bad Quarto Hamlet to be or not to be.
But it's like that, or they thought that it was like because they would have the prompt books. So the theory was they get like one prompt book and then would try to memorize the rest. They would like hold
Yeah,
it.
or
I
they
just think it's really
copy out
funny.
they what they do is they copied out the role so you would get the prompt and your role and that's it. So you
Yeah,
know your line.
yeah.
Um, oh, here's Bad Quarto Hamlet. To be or not to be? Aye, that's the point. Aye. To sleep. Is that all? Aye, all. No, to sleep, to dream. Aye, marry, there it goes. For in that dream of death, when we awake, and borne before an everlasting judge from whence no passenger ever returned, the undiscovered country, at whose sight the happy smile and the accursed damned, but for this, the joyful hope of this, who'd bear the scorns and flattery of the world, scorned by the rich cursed of the poor, the widow being oppressed, the orphan wronged, the taste of hunger or a tyrant's reign, and thousand more calamities beside, to grunt and sweat under this weary life, when that he may his full quietus make with a bare bodkin. Who would thus endure, but for a hope of something after death, which puzzles the brain and doth confound the sense, which makes us rather bear those evils we have, than fly to others that we know not of? I, that. Oh, this
That's the point.
conscious.
That's the point.
Yeah, it's actually not terrible.
Well, I mean, it's. I mean, again,
That's 1604 Quarto, and then yeah,
they were like they told Bill to go memorize, and they were like, "Bill, you fucking suck, bro. Like, what is this? That is not what he said. Like, I remember more of it than that. Like, but I don't remember
yeah.
enough. So just go with what Bill
I
wrote.
wonder because there's also like there's like the they don't call them rough papers. What's the term? Well, it's the
Rough draft.
it's there's another term for it, but it's basically like the spoiled papers, which is sort of his draft, Shakespeare's draft that he wrote on, and then you'd have the the papers for the prompt book, and then you'd have each role copied out. And so you wonder if some of these quartos are just like somebody got the rough papers and we're like,
Yeah.
or somebody did memorize it that way, or if it was just like when they went took it to the first folio, the actors who published the first folio were like, we could fix this. We can make this a little better. We really
Hold
like
on.
this guy.
Hold on. I'm gonna turn this thing up
Oh,
1 second. Just has like the heat on up here, and it's like
mm.
pretty kind of too warm.
Oh.
Um, yeah, I didn't know that was a theory too. So they just fixed it. Just
Maybe. I mean,
fixed
I
some.
we don't really know, right? We don't know where these things came from. There's no
True.
property law, so and yeah, it could have come from anywhere. And we know like nothing about his writing process.
No.
Yeah, I mean, it's for a guy we have so much. I think maybe Ben Jonson we have more from, but of the playwrights of that time, like Shakespeare, we have a lot of things he wrote non play related that are there, like his personal papers. We have a lot of them relative to other playwrights of his time. That is, none of them are about his playwriting. They're like law cases, or he tried to buy his
His
son.
third best bed.
His, to his poor wife.
That was third best bed.
Yeah, he did not like his wife. Who it seemed like it was a shotgun wedding.
Yeah. Let me make
Yeah,
sure that
because
it's
his daughter was born like 6 months after he got married to this woman who was what 10 years older than him
Yeah,
or
she was
something like
much
that.
older than him, yeah.
Yeah. Um, but it's like the coat of arms. He bought his father a coat of arms, so we have like he wrote a lot about that. He's very litigious, so he liked to sue people. So we have those writings. We have no, there doesn't seem to be any interest whatsoever in him preserving his plays. It seemed like when they made me money, he was happy. When they didn't make him money, he didn't care. And it's not like people didn't care about their reputation. Like Ben Jonson spent money to preserve all of his plays in a folio. That's why we have all of Ben Jonson's plays because he's like, we are keeping these things. I worked hard on them. I'm going to publish them in gold lettering, and it's going to be gorgeous, and I'm so wonderful. And Shakespeare just didn't seem to really care
Shakespeare
about.
gotta get paid,
You
son.
know, yeah, that's all he wanted. He wanted to get paid, and then when he wasn't
Yo,
getting
people are still
paid,
reading Hamlet. I wrote that shit in like a fortnight. Hamlet gotta get paid, son.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, he was the Dr. Dre of his day.
I mean, I'm trying to think if there's like an equivalent. I mean, the equivalent would probably be like, I don't know, the I Love Lucy or something, or one of those shows from like the 50s or so where they just were like, or like early Doctor Who or something like that,
Yeah,
where they just were like, we don't have, there's a whole bunch of early Doctor Who episodes that are just gone because the BBC was like, the tape, we're running out of tape. Tape's expensive. Just use that. And so they just were like, yeah, we'll just tape over them. And so some of they would periodically they'll find one and be like, we found one. We found another Doctor Who episode. But I feel like things like that, I don't know if it was like
yeah.
comparable, where it was just like
Oh, I think
whatever.
television writing, I think, is exactly comparable to
Yeah.
early modern playwrights. Because I mean, Shakespeare writing on his own is unique. Most people wrote in teams. Even Shakespeare wrote in teams
Yeah,
with
he
Sir
wrote teams,
Thomas
yeah.
More or Edward III was another play he probably helped people with. And no one can, I mean, it's like television writing. Like your favorite episode of Friends, you have no idea who wrote it. You don't
Yeah.
care.
You don't care. No, it
And
didn't
that's,
matter.
yeah, because it's in part because it's just television writing is not considered special. I remember of the episode of Seinfeld when George tries to hit on a woman by saying he writes for sitcoms. She's like, he tried to use it. He tried to bait me by saying he was a television writer. And they're just laughing hysterically because nobody cares about television writers. And that's what it was in the early modern period. And nobody cared about them. What they cared about was people who wrote sonnets. If you could write a sonnet sequence, you were a high artist. You were like a filmmaker. That would be the
Yeah.
equivalent. And if you wrote plays, you were like a television writer. It's just a bunch of crap people turned down. And then years later, we come along and realize, oh no, the sonnet
Some of them, yeah.
cycles were not the really precious thing. The really precious thing actually were the plays. And I think it's what's going on in television now is sort of a similar recognition of like, oh, it's not movies aren't inherently better. We're just not seeing the possibility of this form, and now we kind of are. I think that's the bemoaning of television taking over our consciousness and movies kind of taking a back seat to that. I think is a little silly because it's happened before, and I think this is around
Well, it's probably
1600.
this should probably be in the podcast itself.
Oh, we're recording, so if KJ wants
Oh,
to,
okay.
KJ, if you want to use this, we finished insulting you, so we started recording, and so you can use this part. But yeah, yeah. So I'd say like 1600 is the time when it's kind of like the invention of a genre, right? Because you had plays in ancient Greece, and they mattered a lot, but since then, I mean,
They definitely are. I mean, the Romans have that, but
Romans
it's not,
did, yeah,
but not particularly notably. I mean, there's a number of the Roman comedies sort of come up in Shakespeare, but they're not all that. They're not all that
yeah.
good.
Yeah, and when
But
we read Roman writers, we even like someone like Seneca. Seneca was a successful playwright. We don't read Seneca's plays. We read Seneca, but his philosophies, his things like that. We don't read
you're
his
gonna read like
plays.
Juvenal or some of these, some of
Mhm.
these guys they'll pop up and they still sort of have we can recognize some of the stories because they're recognizable stories and they kind of get recycled. But in and of their own right, I've never even heard of anybody doing a Roman play.
Mhm.
I've never heard of it. I've never seen it.
I directed
Why?
one once,
Oh,
but
God help you.
it was
Why?
really bad. Yeah,
Yeah,
I thought I could. I don't know. This was years ago when I had pretensions of being a theater director. I think making the choice to direct a Roman play was evidence that was not the career for me.
I mean, they're not like good.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
yeah.
the problem with them. I mean, and again, I suspect it would be like somebody in 2000 years trying to put on, I don't know, the Honeymooners. Like, I think a lot of people would watch this and be like, "What's the joke?" Like,
Mhm.
there's I don't understand what is a bus driver? What were they do? Like, I think so many of the jokes are just topical, and so they
They're
don't always.
topical. Yeah, it's also a lot of slapstick. The Romans did a lot
Yeah,
of slapstick, which is fine. I mean, and it's not, you can convert that, but I just don't think we don't do slapstick anymore.
no, not particularly well. But I guess
Yeah.
the point is, so we agree. Greek theater has some really good ones. Then you get Roman, which is like okay, and then you kind of just have like 1500 years of not great stuff. Like some of the mystery plays are fun. I actually
Hmm.
kind of think there's actually some artistry there.
I think
But they're
I think every man is worth
and I think Everyman is sort
a
of
read.
worth it. But many of them, but they're not. It's not the same. Like they do have they have the feeling of sort of quaint country pieces, and some of them are fairly decent. But there's nothing
Hmm.
stunning that's really coming out of that period or minimal stuff. And obviously then you get Shakespeare and that is the emergence of a genre. Like this is just a new thing that really hadn't existed for 100, a prior 100 years, 150 years earlier.
Hmm.
Mass entertainment of this type wasn't available. Commedia dell'arte, sure, but that's not the same. Um,
It's not the same, and it's also Commedia dell'arte, I would say, is housed in the individual actors more than in a script,
yeah.
which means it doesn't have the technology to be preserved as well.
I guess I mean live performance had existed, but not scripted
Hmm.
plays.
Yeah.
And that's just new for the most part.
Yeah, it is new, and part of it is paper just gets cheaper and cheaper, so it becomes possible. Another reason which explains the growth of theater, especially in London, is a sort of an interesting unintended consequence of legal changes at the time, which was the vagabond laws of the 1570s and 1590s, which said if you're wandering around, you will get arrested. The first offense, I think, was we cut off your ear. No, the first offense was you get whipped. The second offense was we cut off your ear. And then the third offense was execution. And the people who were responsible for being vagabonds not only were actual vagabonds wandering around without a job, but acting troops at this time wandered from place to place and put on their plays. And then they legally were barred from doing this. And very soon after the Vagabond Act is passed, you have the Red Bull Theatre built in London. And from there, you just have theater after theater being built in London at different times until they're closed down in 1642. And so one of the accidental consequences of outlawing roaming troops of actors is they have to get kind of local. Once they get local, once they're in a place, once there's a network going on of these actors and they have a kind of in-house audience, suddenly things get written down. Suddenly you have a market for written plays because you've heard of this play being performed at the Rose or the Globe or someplace. And now, because they can be preserved and transmitted, they suddenly start to get really, really good. Like early Tudor plays, they're kind of hard to read. They're kind of not that fun. Like Ralph Roister Doister, I don't know, the first English comedy is it's a little rough to get through. But a few decades later, you have things that make people laugh today, right? And I think part of that is the fact that things suddenly became much more networked and transmittable. And part of that is it got local and also paper got much, much more affordable in this time period. And I think probably without those, we don't have Shakespeare. I think if we had not cut off a bunch of actors' ears for wandering around, we might not have gotten Shakespeare. So God bless those people who gave up I think it was their left ear. I think that they cut off their left ear. God bless those people who gave up their left ear so that we today could have Shakespeare. You can rate and review this show anywhere fine podcasts are available. For those viewing in YouTube land, if you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the Talking Studios channel for all our exciting content, and follow us on social media at Talking Studios. Check out other shows by Talking Studios, including Talking Pictures Trivia, where we explore movies through trivia, Keep Making Movies, where we explore micro-budget films, Limited Lexicon, where we play through text-based adventure games, and Get the Point, where we slowly reveal a movie poster and try to guess which movie poster it is. Got a question for us? Call the Talking Studios hotline at 201-467-8679 and leave a message. It may be featured on a future episode. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Adapt It, wherever fine podcasts are found. Thank you for joining us this season of Adapt It, and stay tuned for Adapt It Season 4, Adapting Shakespeare. I'll see you then.
Wow, Talking Studios.
Next week we'll be discussing Chimes at Midnight. Pat, if you could play one role in this play, what would it be?
I mean, when I was younger, I'm quite certain I would have been cast as Prince Hal if I was just like, if I got the role, because everyone would be like, "You're such a young, boyish kid, you'll play Prince Hal." Is yeah, but that's not who you want to play. Everyone wants to play Falstaff. I feel I'm much more Falstaffian now that I've got older. I'm drinking a cup of sack right now. It's I've gotten portly because I don't run anymore. I even have the hood thing on right now. You can't see me, but I could be Falstaff. I think I'd be pretty good at Falstaff. I'm picking the obvious one.
Ah, very good. Yeah, I think when you were younger, I could see a few theater directors we both knew having you play Prince Hall, just because of like youthful, blah blah blah.
You're
That type of thing.
youthful. That's why I got
Yeah.
cast as Richmond in Richard III, the most
Yeah.
boring character, that self-righteous. We'll get to Richard later, but he's so self-righteous, and yet, that was when I got cast as. I'm like, oh, this part's so boring.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
But
Um,
what about you? What would you
oh,
cast yourself as?
I think I would be both then and today cast as Hotspur. I think
Yeah,
yeah,
I can see that.
yeah, I'm kind of a big guy. Hotspur, you get the impression he's just this big, angry, he's respectable. Actually, talking about Hotspur in this movie, I didn't like what they did with him. But regardless, he's this like big, angry guy
Yeah, he's much
who's,
angrier in the play.
yeah,
Just
who's ready to like go in it and get in a fight. And I think even though I'm probably not as ill-tempered as Hotspur, I think I probably come off that way. If you
it's the
meet me,
Jersey. It's the Jersey blood.
yeah, it's if you're like an Irish Italian from North Jersey, you probably are a little Hotspur, regardless of whether you want to be or not. So I think I would be a Hotspur character, which I'm fine with. I like that role. I think
It's a
that is
good
a
role. It is a good. This
fun
play has
role.
a lot of good roles. This play
Yeah.
has a lot of good roles.
Mhm. Yeah, it really does.